Hi everyone. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to tonight's event. My name is Fatma Rasool and I go by she, her pronouns. I am the public programming representative here at the museum. Before we get started, I would like to ground us. The Arab American National Museum sits on Anishinaabe land and resides within the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and other indigenous peoples' land, and as being the largest Black majority city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Together, we also uplift and honor the indigenous and diasporic communities from wherever you may be joining us from if you're watching via live stream. I want to thank everyone here for joining us. Your support of the Arab American National Museum helps us to continue to deliver content and programming. To learn more about our upcoming programs or to become a museum member, please visit arabamericanmuseum.org. I would also like to extend a welcome and thanks to the museum's National Advisory Board members in attendance today. We're so glad to have you guys in Dearborn for the week. This program is presented in partnership with the National Network for Arab American Communities, or NAC, a fellow institution of Access. I'm pleased to be introducing Shams Al-Badry, who will be moderating the panel today. Shams Al-Badry is a civic engagement manager at NAC. She is pursuing her master's degree in community development at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and serves as a board member for the Young Nonprofit Professional Network of Detroit. Previous to her roles at Access, she served as an academic advisor at UNL and taught as a Teach for America Corps member. Shams was the first American mayoral appointee to the Lincoln and Lancaster Planning Commission. She also served as a Real Change Fellow, where she lobbied on Capitol Hill on behalf of millions of Americans living in poverty, asking members of Congress to support a proposal that will lift families out of poverty. Shams is a former board member for the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network of Lincoln, New Leaders Council of Omaha, YWCA of Lincoln, Academic Advising Association of UNL, and a subcommittee chair for the Superintendent's Facilities Advisory Committee for Lincoln Public Schools. She continues to stay active in her new community of Dearborn by continuing to be civically engaged in local and state politics. Let's welcome Shams here.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Can you guys hear me in the back? Yeah, okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and welcome, thank you, Fatma, for that introduction. I think she did a fantastic job. But what I'm going to do is welcome our panelists, and we are still waiting on one more, so when he comes, he will be joining us. First, I would like to welcome Eman Eman is a lot. So Eman is amazing to start off, but she's also a principal at Salina Elementary School, or Intermediate School. In addition to that, Eman also serves on several committees in our community. She's a community mobilizer. She's active in everything that she does. So Eman, please come join us. And then next, our next panelist is Ghida. Ghida, please come join us as I speak about how amazing you are. Ghida is the director of New American Leaders, an organization that uplifts new Americans and helps them run for office, provides them the resources that they need. And in addition to that, Ghida has been doing activism work for a long time. We were actually just talking about this. The position that I currently have at NAC, she used to have, but she used to do that and advocacy, so I don't understand how she does both of those. But I'm going to go ahead and have our amazing panelists. First of all, can we give them a warm round of applause? And then I'm going to have our panelists kind of give us a little more information about themselves. It's going to be more of a conversation. I know we have quite a few folks from our high schools and early college who are interested in politics and learning more, so this conversation is going to be geared towards folks who are interested in either running for office or if they're interested in getting involved in city government and so forth. So kind of to start us off, I'm going to have Eman start with, just give us a little information about your background and what brought you to do, I know you're a principal, but in addition to that, you juggle a million other things within the community. And you also, I would love for you to also talk about your humanitarian work and how you are able to navigate all of that. And then we'll go on.
Well, thank you for the warm welcome. Can y'all hear me? Is it loud enough? For those who don't know me, my name is Eman Ali-Ahmed. I see many familiar faces, and I'm really inspired, especially from the youth that are here, our future leaders. I am a daughter of immigrants. My parents immigrated here in the late 60s. My mom followed in the early 70s. And I come from a family of six siblings, the second oldest. And it was rewarding. I mean, I grew up in the south end of Dearborn. For those of you who don't know where the South End is, it's a beautiful community. You drive around right now, you see that it's still vibrant. People are still building homes in the area because they want to live there, because it has a sense of community. I'm very proud of my upbringing. I have 3 children who I'm very proud of. One actually is in the room today. Yusuf, a future leader. And what I want for my kids is what everyone wants for their children is, you know, just to live in peace, to have equal opportunities, and to live in this American dream that we're all part of. So thank you. And then I'll have, I guess.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ghida Dagher, Ghida, Dagher, if you can't pronounce the Ghaz. I was born in Sierra Leone in West Africa. I'm a 3rd-generation Sierra Leonean, 100% Lebanese, and a 1st-generation American. I'm an immigrant myself. I moved here as a refugee when I was 10 years old or 9 years old. And we moved to Dearborn because this is where a large Arab American community exists. And our family really wanted us to have a support system or a community that looked like us. And I became engaged super early. It wasn't really a choice to become civically engaged and become an activist in my own way, whether I knew I was an activist or not. It really is because I was formed, my thoughts, a lot of my political identity, a lot of my activist identity was formed in the aftermath of 9/11. So growing up in Dearborn, and growing up as a refugee in Dearborn, when 9/11 happened, it really shook us to the core. I remember to the point where we thought, all right, we've been here for a couple years, it's time to pack up again. They're not gonna want us here. So we all became very aware of our identities and sort of stepped into whatever opportunities there was. And so it carried on. I think I did my first volunteer activity on a political campaign when I was 11 years old. I called New American or immigrant voters and spoke to them in Arabic about why it was important for them to vote. And I did it without knowing that it was like a civic engagement activity. I did it because I needed them to go out and vote, because our lives depended on it. And that's a lot to think about as an 11-year-old, but that's the reality of where it went. And so my career sort of propelled from there. I organized around a lot of different causes that were important to me. I went to college where I organized even more on campus around some of these issues. I ran for student government. And after graduating, I went to work at NAC, at the National Network for Arab American Communities, where I did civic engagement and advocacy work. I also, at that time, it was a brain drain. Everybody left here after graduating college. Nobody wanted to stay in the area. And I was one of the few in my entire class who decided to be here in Metro Detroit. And so I did work at NAC. I went to work at United Way afterwards to do some government affairs and community affairs. I did a lot of political work. I managed a lot of campaigns. And during that time, I did a training program called New American Leaders Ready to Lead. And that kind of changed the trajectory of what I was doing. I started to do a lot more political work, actually working with politicians on the campaign trail. And then I worked for Governor Whitmer as her director of appointments for 3 years, which I was very, very proud of. We did a record number of appointments at that time. And now I run that organization that I mentioned that's called New American Leaders, and I'm the president and CEO of it. And what we do is train immigrants, refugees, and first and second generation immigrants to run for office, really step into political campaigns, pursue appointments, and really flex that political muscle that we all have. And it's pan-ethnic, multicultural, multi-faith, and it really embraces all walks of life. So I'm happy to be with you all here.
I really like that, flex that political muscle. Can we use it for our campaign? Okay, there we go. Count Mina in, we're here. As Representative Aiyash has joined us, as you all can see. We're really excited for you to be here. What we're doing is just kind of giving a brief introduction about who we are, what motivates us to do the work, and just a little background about what brought you to the work that we're currently doing in the civic engagement realm.
Yeah, so I ran for office and I won. That's the short end. On a serious note, I wish I was as cool as Ghida. I'm listening to her story, I'm like, damn, I'm next, what am I gonna say? So I started when I was 13, so I was a little bit older than she was. I was in computer class, and I was a terrible typer. So I cut a deal with my friend who's Bengali. I'd buy her a snack in the lunchroom every day. She would send me the computer assignment that we had to do for typing class. So I'm sitting in class for an hour, I have nothing to do because I'm not typing the assignment. I typed the first words and the last words in case the professor, or the teacher did like undo to see if you copied and pasted this whole document. So while I'm waiting, I'm on yahoo.com. Because I thought, if you want to be cool, you got to know what's happening in the world. I go on yahoo.com. And for those of you, you guys are probably too young for this, but Yahoo has these sliding pages where you could see the main headlines. And there's a headline about Barack Obama in 2007. And I only clicked on it because I really liked his logo. I have a passion for graphic design. So I click on the link, I listen to his speech, I have no idea what the heck he's saying, but I'm like, this guy sounds really good. So I sign up for his emails. You know, when you go to his page, splash page, put your email on. A couple days later, I get an email saying, Abraham, I need you. And I was like, wow. This man is running for president of the United States, and he's emailing me for $3. So I don't have a credit card. I run home and I tell my dad, I say, Baba, this guy named Barack Obama needs me, I need your credit card. And my dad's like, what the hell are you talking about? So I said, just give me your credit card. So I take his credit card number, I go to school the next day, I punch it in, and I get my bumper sticker mailed to my house for giving Barack Obama $3. A couple of months later, I learned that there's this thing called MailChimp, and I'm really sad. But that was the first start of my sort of political expose. This guy by the name of Barack Hussein Obama is running for president. And I was deeply inspired that somebody who's the closest thing to that, to a politician that's close to me is this guy, right? We had John Kerry, and now we had this guy named Barack Obama. So I knocked that election cycle 15,000 doors for Barack Obama's campaign. In fact, I wasn't even able to drive at the time. Yeah, you can clap, as Jeb Bush says. Please clap. I'm kidding, y'all don't have to clap, but that was the start for me, and I sort of figured out, all right, this guy won, I got to find a way to stay engaged, and I learned what recycling was when I was in the 8th grade. And I was really frustrated because, like most immigrant parents, my dad doesn't trust the tap water, so we drink bottled water at home, and I would say, why are we throwing away so much plastic? So I started collecting all the plastic, and I used to figure out, we got to find a way to throw this away. So by my 6th bag, my mom was like, all right, you're going to throw these out, or I'm going to throw them out. So I found a recycling center in Detroit. It's called Recycle Here. And I learned, communities that weren't mine, which was a little bit more black, a little bit more brown, a little bit more poor than the rest of the communities around me, that recycling was a thing. So I channeled that energy and I worked on getting a recycling program established in my local school. So we launched a district-wide plastic and paper recycling program. Took Go Green literally, went to Michigan State, and when I went to MSU, I was a small fish in a huge pond, so I sort of retreated as a first-gen college kid. I didn't figure out what I wanted to do. So I did some work, campus or organizing. I got arrested on campus for canvassing for Obama's campaign in 2012. And 2014, the midterm elections happened, and I realized I wanted to stay out of politics. So I'd rather be a doctor, write checks to politicians, and sort of have that type of influence. I'm thrown back into politics in 2016. I worked for my state rep, Rosemary Robinson, and I hated working in Lansing, our state capital. It was the worst thing in the world. Nothing got done. Democrats had like 42 seats. Republicans had like 68. It's like we were in a super minority. And I decided I wanted to go to medical school. Then, like so many folks who are involved now, Donald Trump was elected president and was thrown back into the political whirlwind just several days before Trump signed the first travel ban. My uncle was killed in an airstrike in Yemen. And that really hit home to me because we were actually waiting for his paperwork to be processed. We were trying to bring him and his family to the United States. So I recognized in that moment that if I'm not going to bring my story and the pain that my family experienced into the realm of power, which is our political system, then I would be doing a disservice not only to my uncle's legacy, but to the tons and tons of families that are suffering as a result of some of this heinous policy. So I ran in 2018 for state senate. Everybody thought I was nuts. I was 24 at the time. And I ended up losing on election day voting by 25 votes. And I'm gonna tell y'all, losing sucks. And it sucks even more when you're like doing it in front of a bunch of people. So it's like a public failure. You know, if I like lose Call of Duty at home, I'll just turn my game off and everything's fine. But like you lose an election, like the whole world knows, it's on record, it's frustrating. 2020, my state rep dies from COVID-19. About a week after his death, I got a call from his father encouraging me to run for that seat. So I ran in a 13-way primary in 2020. We had less than 100 days to run a campaign. We got to tell people to vote for Ibrahim twice because there's a special and there's a special election and the regular election. And then to make matters more complicated, there's another Ibrahim on the ballot. So now I'm telling people to vote for Abe twice, but there's 4 Abes on the ballot. So you got to imagine trying to organize a predominantly Arab community or an ESL community to vote for the right Ibrahim. So we were successful. Alhamdulillah, we were able to secure that primary win. And this year I was reelected, well, I won my primary again. Again, the same Abe that ran against me in 2020 ran against me this year. So we were able to be successful there, and I've sort of focused my work, and I promise I'll wrap up quickly, around a concept I call diptech. Diptech is sort of the theory of and focus in which we do our legislation and figuring out how we fight for social, economic, and racial justice. So the D is diversity, the I is infrastructure, P is tackling poverty, T is transportation, E is environment, C is corruption and ending corporate greed, and H is housing. So these are the sort of the 7 issue points that we focus on in my office, and we are pushing a lot of these concepts here in the state legislature. And God willing, at the end of this month, or the beginning of November, I am also running to be the majority floor leader in the Michigan House of Representatives, and I feel very confident about my chances. So keep us in your prayers, and that's, final point I'd say, and I promise this is my last part. I talk so much. You can't give a politician a mic, guys. But for me, I think what's incredibly important is that those closest to the pain must be the ones closest to the policy making. And if you think about our communities, particularly black and brown folks across the country, we live in a system in which there is still tinges of white supremacy. So we have a responsibility to engage ourselves in the process, but also recognize that we have to take power. No one's going to give it to us in a 2-day shipping box or a takeout container, right? Power is something you have to grab, and you got to hold on to it. And that's something that I think is important for us to understand as a community, especially those who come from a background or a native country where totalitarianism or authoritarianism was the rule. You know, a lot of our parents say, keep your head down and do good work. Well, we also got to keep our heads up and take some of that power. So I'm hoping that's where we go as a community moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, you all bring up such valid points, but something I do want to talk about is keeping your head down. I remember when I switched my major from engineering to political science, my mom was so upset. Till this day, she tells me, you could have been an engineer. And I'm like, I married an engineer, isn't that enough? But no, it's not. But that being said, you know, I would say our youngest volunteer in the room is Mazen. Mazen's been doing political activism since he was a baby with his mom, Rima. But that being said, he helped us, you know, with National Arab American Voter Registration Day. He gave us great ideas. And then we have youth here that some of them are phone bankers, hello, but they're as young as 15, 14, 16. So my question to you all is, what advice would you give to our youth in our community who are interested in pursuing pre-med, who are interested in pursuing other avenues? How do they get involved in the political work or advocacy work within their own communities?
So I'm a strong believer that there's a role for everyone when it comes to politics. There's not a single person who politics does not only affect but determine the quality of their life. I think that's really important to note. Some people think, oh, that's for politicians, that's something Brahim can worry about, or that's something that Ghida can worry about, or Iman can worry about. But really it affects everything, down to maybe the water in your home, what you do with the plastic that you use, it's what stop sign, or whether there is a stop sign or not in your neighborhood, down to your rights, your bodily autonomy. Everything around you is determined by policy making. And as much as we are a democracy, there are only a few who do determine what policy actually looks like. And that's the people that you vote for to represent you. Which is why it's really important that when we are voting and we are engaging and we are supporting people, it's people who share our values, regardless of what they look like. It's people who are gonna prioritize what's important to us and how we see the world. And not just us, but people who look like us. I wanna note that it's really important that when we're talking about movement building and we're talking about making good policy, that a lot of our fates as people of color, as immigrant communities, are tied to one another. What is gonna affect me as an Arab American woman, I can't advance as an Arab American woman if a black woman isn't also advancing, or Latina is also advancing, or Asian American woman is also advancing. So you have to think about yourself in the bigger ecosystem and think about what role you can really step into, whether it's phone banking, whether it is you want to be the one to write the checks, or you want to be the one that's sitting in a chamber at a state capitol or at a city hall. There's a role for everyone to play, and so don't be afraid to step into it. And don't wait for someone to ask you. This is your world, it's your life. Step into it, lean in, and really make it your own process. And if you want to talk about what that looks like, I know any of us up here would be super happy to show you what options exist and to pull you into some really great projects.
Just to piggyback on Ghada's point, just this morning, we took about 100 8th graders to Lapeer Park, and we did tree planting, and we talked about the importance of just going more green in our environment and planting more trees and why we plant trees. So I think starting with why, as Simon Sinek would say, the need of growing up in the South End community and now coming back full circle as a school principal, longtime educator, almost 2 decades, I've seen environmental injustice. I mean, just look out from any angle on the 3rd floor of Salina Intermediate, whether it's the south side, looking over at Levy Trucking, or the east side with CSX, or the route, it's not called the Route Sale anymore, but it's Cleveland Cliffs, Ford Motor Company. And then on the south side, we have the Marathon Refineries. And on the north side, we have the scrap yards and the trucking companies, and so on and so forth. So the area is surrounded by pollution, air pollution. So encouraging the students and really, discuss, either whether it's a student council or NJHS or maybe a class project, and getting the students involved and connecting with other organizations such as Access, to ensure that the kids have a voice, because you are the future generation. And as our community matures, we're not limited to just being a lawyer or engineer or doctor. Now we're campaign managers and field directors and so on and so forth. So do what you love, follow your dreams, and just find out where the need is and what you like to do and activate that change. So.
And you know what's interesting for me, when you say student council and getting involved in those realms, and even for students who are in college, who are here with us today, I remember my activism, actually, I would say a lot of it started in college, but before then, I remember going to, so I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, home of the Cornhuskers. But that being said, there was not many Arab Americans or Muslim Americans that were in the community. And I remember going to my high school principal and advocating for us to have Eid off without them, without it counting towards our attendance. And I remember him saying like, oh, well, you can miss 12 days and we won't count that. But I'm like, no, no, no. I want perfect attendance. How do we go about getting that? And that was where my activism started, is having those conversations. And sometimes it is tough conversations, but you might be the only person in the room. So when we're talking about representation, what are the biggest challenges that you've seen in your own lives, whether it's in politics, whether it's in academics, whether it's in any like realm of society? What are some challenges you've seen, or even maybe strengths?
You know, I think the first thing is there's almost this immense pressure to be everything for everyone. And I recognize the power of representation, obviously in my own personal experience growing up, but for me, what I remember after winning my election, I went to the mosque and I shook hands with one of the guys very supportive of me, and I remember seeing his son. And he was telling his little son, his little kid, he's like, hey, this is the guy we voted for. And it took like 15 seconds for that to register, like, oh, this is Ibrahim Aiyash, and the kid literally started crying. And that moment was like, damn, like this is what it means when you have somebody that grows up in your community to be able to bring that to light. But I think the other frustration sometimes is, you know, I'm in spaces where I'm seen as my ambition is aggression, that I have to be a certain type of Arab or Muslim, and I can't think of certain things, and then even internally within our own community, I have to be representative of everyone's opinion, but there's about 50 or 60 different opinions in terms of what I should be and what is proper. And I'll give you one quick example, going back to the mindset some of our parents come from. You know, I speak very openly about my faith and how my faith drives me to do some of this work. And I remember I had an elder tell me, you know, try to tone down your expressions of your faith. You know, we don't want them to be afraid. And I took a step back and I says, look, this is exactly why I'm doing it, right? I want you to recognize that in the same way someone can invoke scripture of their own faith and invoke the servant leadership of Jesus, we can do the same within our own tradition. And there's nothing to be ashamed of, but also I don't have the responsibility to address every single issue that relates to the Yemeni community or the Yemeni American community or the Arab American community or the Muslim community, right? I have to make sure that I'm fighting for the things that are important to me, but I'm also a representative for other people. You know, most folks think I won because I had a majority of the Arab community turn out and vote. The reality is 85% of my voting base is African American, right? So it wasn't the Arab or Muslim community that, I mean, absolutely was a significant factor in me running and the organizing around my candidacy was important, but I know at the end of the day, my district is a predominantly African American district. You know, I represent my district is 75% Detroit. Detroit is an 80% black city. You do the math, I have a responsibility to serve those people in the same way that my community expects that. And I think that's always the hard balance.
When you know, there's often, most of my career I've been always either the youngest person in the room, or I'm the only woman, or I'm the only Arab American. And it's quite obvious. You feel it when you're the only person in the room. Things are changing, which is really exciting to see more representations and conversations of all backgrounds and all issues, which is really, really exciting. But when you are, and there will be times when you are the only of something or the first of something, embrace it. But don't let it define who you are and what you're doing, because I think that's really important. Don't get stuck on being the first or being the only. You actually want to open up the room to make sure everybody else is in it, because it makes a huge difference. And I actually want to provide a couple of examples of how it has played out in my experience. When I was in student government, for example, at the University of Michigan, there is the student government in Ann Arbor is quite large. It's one of the largest universities, as you know, and the student budget, the student government budget, has an allocation for student organizations. It's supposed to be money that goes towards funding things like the Arab Student Association, or the Black Student Union, or the fraternities and sororities, all of these really important organizations on campus that really create student life and vibrancy. And it's somewhere between 12 to 20 million depending on the year and how much is coming out of tuition. So think about that number, and it's huge. And it's supposed to support, again, those programming. And so for years, people felt boxed out of that process. They would apply for money to do their programs, to do things like this, that are Arab-focused, for example, and they didn't always get reviewed fairly or equitably. And so when I came into student government, that was one of my biggest priorities. I moved on to serve on the executive board of the student government as a chief program officer. And one of the things that was really important to me was to make it equitable. And if they had questions on an application, wasn't to toss out the application, it was to actually follow up with a group, especially if it was a new American group or a group that's underrepresented on campus, and to say, hey, I have questions about this program. Or you know what, let me open up office hours to help you change that. And that changed the entire ballgame of what was getting funded for student groups on campus. That's very similar to the process that might happen at a budget at state level, or at a city level with appropriations, or anything like that. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll also, a little bit about my service when I was with the governor's office, with Governor Gretchen Whitmer. I oversaw the appointments. So all of the boards and commissions that you hear about, the Middle Eastern Commission, the Teacher Tenure Commission, the State Compensation Commission that that decides the salaries for legislators, all of those fall underneath the appointments position to find people to sit on them. So very critical positions. And what was really important to me is because even when I was interested in appointments, I felt like that was only accessible to certain kinds of people, whether it was people who were high ups or people who came from generations of being involved. And so I felt very strongly about not just looking to people who gatekeepers were giving the chance to, but people who were doing the actual work on the ground in the community. Thank you. It was really, thank you. I felt very, very strongly about that because it changed the entire way that we look at policy making at the state level. And what we were able to do is do almost 80 appointments from the Arab American community, 5 of which are judicial appointments to the bench. It's very, very exciting. But it also changes the entire conversation when there's a policy issue. It's say, who else do we talk to? Obviously, I'm very proud of the work that we did in the governor's office. The governor really empowered us to do all of these wonderful things and was such a champion of it, but it really does make a difference to have that diverse voice, and which is why she championed that issue, right? So it's really important that people are stepping into whatever is important to them. For me, it's always been about how can we bring more people that look like us into these positions? Whether it was at student government or whether it is state government or whether it's in the role that I have now, it's how do we multiply our power?
So just in talking about the road to representation, I believe everyone has a role to play. When it comes to activism, there's many forms that take form or take part, whether it's social media, being respectful and going on social media and sharing and, bringing attention to an issue, or there's activists on the ground who are doing the work, who are protesting and bringing light, whether it's environmental injustice or the crumbling infrastructure or, improving education. So know that everyone here has a voice, no matter how young, how old, what your background is, and knowing that everyone here has some kind of representation and being proud of who you are, being proud no matter whether you wear hijab, whether you don't wear hijab, your religion, your background, your ethnicity, just being proud of who you are and know that you do have a voice in being represented.
Just for the audience, just kind of keep it, we do have a QR code. If you scan that, it will take you to a Google Sheet where you can ask questions. So please feel free to ask questions. They're taped to the back of most of the seats, so feel free to do that. Something that you all mentioned, like as you guys were talking, I was thinking of imposter syndrome, because I think a lot of the rooms that we're going to be in, or a lot of the, where there may have not been an Arab American ever in that room or in that space. I remember when I was, when the mayor called me and she goes, hey, you know, I've heard about the work that you do, and I had volunteered on her campaign, and that's how she kind of heard about me. But she was like, I want to nominate you for the Public Planning Commission. And I was like, me? What do I know? And that was based off my experience in, although I was doing community development, I was on the ground working with communities, and my head was, is she asking me because I'm Arab American? Am I meeting a quota? What is it? And I remember going into her office and her just like explaining to me, like, this is what we do, this is our role. And I like started looking up everything and like reading, and I realized not only was I the youngest person on the commission, I was one of the only people of color on the commission at that time, but in addition to that, I was not the most financially secure. Like when they asked for my disclosures, I was like, what disclosures? Do you want my bank account? Then I learned a lot of people on the commission have, you know, been in the country, I mean, intergenerational wealth. They owned certain communities. Like they were pretty out there, and they were making decisions for a community. So when we were talking about affordable housing, when we're talking about issues that affect our communities, although people are well-intended, but I think sometimes it's, our people are not in that room. We're not in that space, and we're not able to kind of share that. So I guess my question to you all is, have you ever been in a room where you felt imposter syndrome, and how did you overcome that?
Well, I feel like an imposter right now on the stage.
Stop.
No, look, sure, it happens, right? I think you have to remind yourself, you know, I always say, I bring the IKEA cabinet theory, and I remind myself that a lot of things are complex, not complicated, right? You know, you look at an IKEA cabinet, you don't got to be a carpenter to build it. You just got to know how to read a manual. And that's sort of what I remind myself is like, sometimes it's just, you got to understand and learn, but it's also a reminder that you being one of the first in your community, and it's really annoying. I hate saying, oh, you're the first this, first that. To Ghida's point, I'm sick of hearing that. Like, I'm over it, you know? But it's also important for me to remember that I am also one of the few who've started in this path. So there's going to be things that I have to learn. And I think what helps me is I like to document my experiences in these spaces and places, and then I like to share that with people that are also expressing interest. What that does is sort of gives me an assurance that it's always like this thing, once you learn something, and then if you can teach it to somebody, you feel more confident about your ability to say you know or understand or grasp this issue or concept. I think the same goes for some of our work in politics and in advocacy. Sometimes it's helpful to say, I understand something now, and I'm going to go tell somebody about it so that I feel like I actually get it. And in specific with politics, you know, I'll use an example I did with Ghida. I was pushing for an African American to be appointed to a court system here in Michigan, and unfortunately that candidate was not picked. So I remember where I was actually. I was in New York at the time, and we had a long conversation. And I was talking to Ghida, and she was explaining to me the whole process. And I was like, okay, tell me how I can help this person so that they can have a better opportunity to get into this post. And just being able to hear this from her and understand this is the process, I was then able to call that candidate and say, hey, this is what happened. I think you have a lot of potential, so on and so forth. And then I sort of felt a sense of security. When I initially asked to nominate that person, I was like, what the hell am I doing? I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, what does this mean? Do I lose political capital? All this. But then having the conversation with you, I was like, oh, this is not that complicated, right? And I was able to sort of navigate that, and I felt a sense of safety and a sense of security in my understanding of this issue.
It's really natural for us to have imposter syndrome. I want to say that. It's okay for you to feel uncomfortable in a new space. It's okay for you not to know everything about everything. You shouldn't know everything about everything. If you think you know everything about everything, you probably are in the wrong place and you don't know. Just want to say that first. But, so it's okay for you to step into a room and say, hey, I don't look like everybody else. I might not speak like everybody else. I don't come from the financial background like everybody else. And take that as a strength. That makes you unique in that room. It gives you your own superpowers, a way to talk to people, to bring a perspective forward that nobody else is thinking about. It's actually critical. Often, when I'm thinking about who I want in a room, I want people in the room that aren't usually in the room because I want to hear what they have to say. We have a saying at New American Leaders is that politics and our American democracy for very long has functioned as being too male, pale, and stale, right? What we have always thought about what politicians look like is usually a white older man who's suited and looks a certain kind of way and I can't relate to, or you might not be able to relate to. And what we're trying to do is change that, right? So I want you to think about that the next time you have an imposter syndrome. It's like, have they been doing what they think they're doing well to start with, right? If not, that's why it's even more important for you to be there.
This is a message to students or someone trying to do something new in life or afraid to. I always say if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So never be afraid to take the leap of faith and do something different. And be proud if you're, like as your mayor, someone that I'd probably look up to, that invited you to be part of, part of her team, because she saw there was a need. I mean, I know there's an influx of refugees in Nebraska, so she wanted that representation. It's unfortunate that some with some cities, you don't have that. I mean, the city of Dearborn, for example, has 50% of a Dearborn population. I would say 5%, around 5% Black, 5% Latino. But when you look at the previous administration, it's predominantly Caucasian or white. So I commend the new administration for ensuring that everyone has a seat at the table and there is equal representation with the city. I mean, it takes more than an email or a conversation to understand what the city needs, or the city, what are the needs in the city. So, yeah, never be afraid to take that leap of faith, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to be, like I said, be proud of who you are. Be proud of your name, for example. Don't feel like you have to change your name to accommodate the mainstream. I mean, that's what makes you unique. That's what makes you who you are. So, yeah.
I like that because when I moved to Michigan, Rima tackles me for this one sometimes, but my voicemail still says Shams Al-Badry. But now that I live in Dearborn, I can say Shams with no issue. And now I catch myself when I'm speaking to non-Arabic speakers, I will say Shams Al-Badry, and then, change it if I need to. But most times people are easily to pick it up. So that being said, I think I'm going to pivot us just a little bit because our communities aren't counted part of the U.S. Census. So when we're talking about MENA and we're talking about Arab American communities, we're not really considered at a federal level. We're more considered, Dearborn does a great job and we're working towards that, but I think other cities can follow along in other places, and especially for the folks that we're live streaming this for. How are we able to advocate for our communities and advocate for representation when we don't have the data to do so?
As a former NAC civic engagement manager, this is a question and a topic that I take everywhere with me. I think it's really important. It's critical. For those who don't know, census happens every 10 years. It essentially is a population count, right? And it's not simply a population count. What it does is it determines your representation in Congress and in elected official positions. It determines the funding the schools might get. It determines a slew of very critical decisions that are made on your behalf. So is it painful that we are not counted officially? Absolutely. There's been lots of strides. It takes a long time to become an official category. Actually, Hassan Jabed has played a critical role in that over the years. So shout out to Hassan. But what you do when you're not counted is you try to make it happen more locally, is you put pressure on your local administrations to count you, or your university to count you. Back at the University of Michigan, well, it was one of the ballot initiatives that we tried to do. It's called Check the Box. It's because we wanted to be counted on campus, because it allowed us to get more resources. It allowed for cultural competence advisors to talk to us about careers. So what you have to do is advocate at the most local level, advocate in your organizations, in your corporations that you work in, to make sure that there's affinity groups that are for MENA, Middle Eastern North African communities. It doesn't have to be big. It can start very small, and it does take a trickle effect. At the state of Michigan, for example, Michigan has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the country. For the state to collect adequate data on its citizens, it has to count Middle Eastern North African. And so when you usually fill out a form, for example, at Health and Human Services, there's a Middle Eastern box, because then they can't do their job if they're not making sure that we have also what we need. So the advocacy does make a huge, huge difference. But I would say think about local, think about your own, what we call spheres of influence, your individual spheres of influence. How can you really push for a data collection or category that you feel that you can affiliate with and can feel comfortable representing you? There's obviously also a balance of thinking about, don't make it just like a Lebanese box, make it an Arab American or a Middle Eastern box, so that more people can join in, because there's a lot more that unites us than divides us in that way.
No, I just want to add that, like you mentioned, I think the power of the vote, the power of us as voters holding our politicians accountable, because this is bigger than, I would say, local, or even at the state level, but making sure that we have a voice at the federal level that's advocating for change, because it does, representation does matter, and I think having that on the census would just definitely bring attention to the needs of our community and bring more resources in our community, and people like Abraham Aiyash can also assist in making that happen, and along with his team, to ensure that we do have representation, at the Arab American level.
What it does is ultimately, over years, when you are able to say, hey, there's a category, it means that others are also recognizing us. We're not just recognizing ourselves, which means that people are going to look around the room and they're not going to be like, oh, what's missing? They're not going to think Arab American if there's not a box. But when there is a box, they're absolutely going to say, who's missing in this conversation? Or what resources are needed? It's not just it's not just a feel good for us to have a checkbox. It's an accountability for the rest of the world and our fellow citizens and those who make decisions for us to recognize us, so we're forcing their hand at it. And it's a really important, critical topic.
And I'll just quickly add to that. There's power in story, right? But I think a story is more powerful when there's data, right? And I always say, what's more important and more impactful than an anecdote is an anecdata, is a story with numbers. And the reason why that's important is because you're backing your experience with research to say, this is not some lightning strike of a situation, but rather this could be or could point to a pattern of how things are done, or where things are done, or why, or how many, sort of answering those questions. So remember that. Your anecdata is the best thing you can offer when you want to effectuate change.
Wow, so there was a lot that was said here. One thing is, I know when we were advocating for the voter rights, we were advocating for redistricting, right? And we wanted the Arab American community's vote to be counted. We looked at our community of interest, we looked at all of that. And as Eman said, and Ghida, like, a lot of it is tied to our resources, right? So federal resources, that's funding, that's mental health resources for our communities, being able to be counted in that. So I know when we were looking at that, and unfortunately we're not counted, since we're not on the US Census, we're not, when it came to the Voter Rights Act, they weren't talking about Arab American communities, and that's where organizations like Access, organizations that were advocating for our communities to be heard, was really important to have that voice. But on the other hand, Community members didn't know that conversation was happening because that conversation was not broadcasted to them. It was, you have a specific community that you're reaching out to when it comes to politics. And funny story, sorry, I keep sharing stories from high school, and maybe I was a rebel in high school and just didn't know it. But I remember when I went to a multicultural teacher event, and I was told that I had to mark the white box. And I was like, I'm not white though. I'm gonna mark every other box except for white. But that was because I was like, I don't want to be counted towards that. Like, I don't have white privilege. I don't have anything that comes with that. So why would I mark white? And at that time, I didn't understand why we were white, right? And I mean, I still don't understand it, but I didn't understand under like federal law why we were. So that being said, I think it's really important when we're talking about representation, we do have to have these tough conversations of, the census takes about 10 years, right? So what are we doing at a local level? What are we doing within our own school districts? What are we doing at the state level? What conversations are being had, and how do we push for that? And I know some of my teammates are here today, and they're pushing in every avenue, any avenue they can do, whether it's working with the public school systems, working with communities outside of Dearborn and Dearborn Heights and Meldondale, like to have those tough conversations and kind of push for that. That being said, I want to remind the audience again, we do have a QR code you can scan for questions. I did get a question from the audience. Does anyone have anything else to add before I jump in? No? Okay. Where is the Arab representation and political maturity as a community?
That's a big question. Repeat it.
Where are we as the Arab American representation and political maturity as a community?
That depends on who you're asking. It's a very loaded question. I think we've obviously made significant advancements. When I look around, and when we talk political, we're talking, for me, when we say political, I'm defining it as two things. I'm defining it as campaigns, and I'm talking about it also in governance. That's how I sort of define it. And then there's, of course, like the movement around that. But I think we've made some significant advancements. I think about when I was younger and looking around and saying, like, who's in politics that I could talk to who was Arab American? It didn't feel like I could actually reach those people. And so that to me was an indicator, like access within itself, like access to another human that was doing politics that seemed far-fetched. I think we are still a young community. Arab American communities have been in the country for hundreds of years. The oldest Arab American community is actually in New York, Little Syria, that's down by Battery Park. And they've been organized there for a long time, but with different policies, it affects what a community can do. So Little Syria was actually destroyed when they were building these financial buildings and these high rises, and that really the sort of separated a community. Battery Park. Yep. So that community is totally separated. So you have to think about what you're able to do. But if you think about the giving power that this community has, and I'm not talking just big bucks, I'm talking about small dollars and what it's able to do. If you think about representation and the number of folks that we've elected to office, like Ibrahim, and people that we have appointed to different offices in the state of Michigan, we've made very significant strides. Does that mean our work is done? Absolutely not. There's still a lot of maturing to do. A big indicator of politics and political power is also the institutions that exist to support Arab Americans, whether it is organizations that are doing advocacy and pushing elected officials, who's organizing people to actually come out, whether it's to knock doors. And it's also understanding that political power doesn't only happen during an election year. It's an ongoing process. I think that's something that we're still working on as a community. It's not just election day that we have to look out to. It's something that is year-round, 12 months out of the year. There's multiple elections. It's not just the president and the governor. There's municipal, and there's precinct delegates, and there's all of these positions that are critically and equally important as the ones at the top of the ticket. So I think that to me is really the next level of where we need to make strides. It's really engaging ourselves year-round on the things that are most important to us, not just for the photo ops and not just for the lawn signs, but for real continuous change that is there to last so that when we have really worked hard to say on something that is, our parks, let's say for example, it was really, we needed more parks and green space, and we have created this coalition of people, that this coalition continues to be there and present and active on the next issue that might come up, whether it's the recycling or whether it's an election or whether it's building that continuous power, sort of like a snowball that turns into a bigger ball and then it becomes an avalanche. You want to be an avalanche. You want to be a political avalanche. I want us to be a political avalanche, and I know we're capable of it, and it takes a little bit of a time, but it also takes a lot of intention, and it takes a lot of bringing people along, because the opportunities for all of us are endless. It's not one or two that are up for the grabs. There's space for all of us in it.
We are fireworks, I think. Oftentimes, we are shiny and bright and we sparkle, and then 15 seconds later it all disappears, right? And I think we as a community have to do a better job at trying to be candles. 3-wick candles made with paraben-free soy, and sort of that's long lasting. And the reason why that's important, I'll give you an example. There are about 8,000 registered Arabs in my district to vote. Less than 600 voted in my last primary. It's not even 10%. Is that even 1%? Yeah, not 10%. Okay. Don't ask any of us to do math. Oh, you were all an engineer. But I think to Ghida's point, elections are punctuation marks. I believe in a movement politics where it's simply the end of a sentence, and sometimes it'll end in a question marks, like what the heck just happened. But I think that's how we sort of have to think about an election. It's a punctuation mark. The story continues beyond the election. And I think where we see an example of this, I'm stepping into the lion's den. We talk about this issue in Dearborn, but the tensions right now about how literature and how books and curriculum is developed here in Dearborn. Now, this for me highlights a lack of understanding of the process. If we were engaged politically, and the Board of Education is very much a unit of government elected by people, by nature it is political, then we would understand that there are processes and procedures, and we can better focus our efforts on how to address issues that we may or may not agree with. And the emotional reaction to things, I think, highlights a lack of understanding of how these processes work. Now, I'm not here to tell a parent or any advocate how they should feel about a certain issue. I'm simply saying that we have to be clear that in order to address a problem, you must understand the system in which you are trying to find the solution. Because if you do not, then all you are doing is inciting and further disconnecting civil society, which is a broader disease in the American body politic, right? This is not something that's exclusive to us. But I think if we are able to better understand how a system works and where we have to change it, that's where we can be most effective. And I think the final part of this, in terms of we talk about maturation, we have to recognize that it is important when we meet with, we now have access to power. I'm proud of how much access our communities have. But access to power and leveraging power are two different things. We're in the room. When the governor's there, she has access, we have access to the governor. We have access to our Congress members, we have access to our senators and our elected officials from precinct delegates all the way up. The question I always ask myself when I'm in the room is, are we asking and making very specific demands? Do we have concerted, organized efforts? Or are we just happy to be in the room? And I think oftentimes we see folks, and they're well-intentioned, but just being in the room, they often get enamored. Look, I like Governor Whitmer, and I respect her immensely. But when she walks into the room, I don't get all giddy. I'm like, I don't care how famous she is and how many rap songs have been made about Big Gretch. I care about, we need to get some money for these lead pipes in Detroit and Hamtramck ASAP. Like, when are we going to move this money, right? I think the last time I took a picture with the governor is when somebody made me take a picture with the governor, right? And I just say this as a point that we have the space And we have consumed that, and now we got to start leveraging it in a way that's important.
Historically speaking, we are a young community, Arab American community in politics. And I would really want to, first and foremost, really give appreciation and thanks to those who came before us. The ones that are immigrant parents or grandparents who came in without the language, without the support, with very little. A lot of them had to work. There was a working class community. And with the very little that they had, they were there, they represented. Even if it was just being in the room. And that's okay. I mean, being present to me is making an impact. But what I want people to realize is the power of the vote. As Mr. Aiyash mentioned, I think his first election, 25 votes. I think I'd rather lose by like thousands than 25. But just getting communities to realize if they really truly want to be represented, if they want to have a voice, vote. That's what politicians do. They say, all right, which community votes the most? That's where I'm going to hang out. That's where I'm going to door knock. Because that's the community that votes. So getting our Arab American community to realize the power in the vote.
Don't lie whether or not you vote. We see the data every January after the election. Don't make me call you out. You know, I always tell, Rashida and I joke, at the start of every year after the election, we pull up the van data and we actually find the people who told us, yeah, we were with you. And I remember, I swear to God, true story. I had a guy who made a Facebook Live video. He had a ballot in his hand, and I hope it was his ballot, and showed people how to fill in the ballot for me to vote twice in 2020. I looked up his account in January, his voter file. The guy didn't have a ballot requested. So I was like, whose ballot did you take to show people? And more importantly, if you were going to do all of this on Facebook Live, go get your own ballot, man. Right? So we know. So I don't want to hear anybody, if anybody comes and tells me, oh, we voted for you, I'll look it up. I always do not
For the
ever come to
record, he can't tell who you voted for, but they can tell if you voted, yeah.
Thank you, Iman, for that clarification. Vote however you want.
Better vote for me.
But that being said, I mean, I have follow-up to that, but that's something that we're seeing, like doing the work on the ground. Delaney and I do the civic engagement work within NAC and other folks on our team as well. But that being said, it's, you know, unfortunately, politicians do go to people who vote, right? So that's guaranteed. You know, you're door knocking, and you're door knocking in communities that tend
But Abraham goes to everyone, though. Everyone in his district, correct?
That's what I'm supposed to say. So yes.
I mean, he knocked 15,000 doors. I want to know how you did that because, you know, that's one of our goals. So
I skipped a lot of school.
Well, luckily, a lot of the high schoolers are gone. Do not skip.
getting yourself in
I will find out. But that being academics first, I'm going to say that. But that being said, something for me is, you know, when we're talking about this, unfortunately, our communities, there's a lot of community education that needs to be done. And I don't like the term education, and I'm going to bring up Rima again because she's a great mentor. But that being said, I think there's so much work that we can do as folks who do the work on the ground and who understand the political systems. A lot of the work that my team does is in areas where we have low propensity voters. So folks who may have never been registered to vote, folks who may have voted in one election or whatever it may be, just to kind of get the word out and have those conversations. Now, I know we're a C3 and we can do that, and but then we have organizations that are C4 that are more geared towards, you know, endorsing certain candidates and so forth. How do we ensure that we have representation? I mean, we're talking about out-of-American representation, especially like in Dearborn, Hamtramck, and communities in Southwest Detroit, or sorry, Southwest Detroit, Southwest Michigan, Southeast Michigan. Directionally, I'm looking at a mitten right now in my head.
Shams, your Nebraska's showing.
Guys, we're working on it in Nebraska too. But speaking of, also with Nebraska, you know, like that. I remember taking my mom to the polls to vote, and her friends were like, "Oh, we'll come along," like, but they didn't want to vote. They came along for the ride because it was fun, right? But that being said, like, how do we bring our communities into that realm? Like, how do we bring them to the polls? And again, I understand it's more than just election day, right? Like, we need to be engaging communities year round. and having those conversations. But Ghida, I see that you're ready to answer this.
I'm so ready for this one. Like I said, I'm the CEO of an organization called New American Leaders. New American Leaders trains immigrants, first gen, second gen, refugees as well, to run for office, manage campaigns and lead campaigns, and also pursue appointments. So that's the C3, right? That's the nonpartisan. And then there's the C4 that Shams mentioned. We have a sister organization that's a C4. It's called the New American Leaders Action Fund, and that one endorses candidates. So I just want to give an example of how that works. But the core of our teachings at New American Leaders is that if you embrace your own story and are able to tell it by sharing your values, you bring people along, right? Again, you don't have to know everything about everything, but you have to know, you need to show up in your community. You have to run community-centered campaigns. And so we've always been taught that campaigns look a certain way and elected officials look a certain way. We've always been taught that somebody may knock on your door if you're a frequent voter, right? If your vote matters in that way. Or you should only fundraise money from people who have a lot of access to capital because they can write bigger checks, right? These are sort of the traditional teachings of campaigns. What we have done and what we teach is to turn that system on its head. And you have to do it in a way that works for you and works for your community that you want to vote for you, right? So what that means is showing up at small businesses. What it means is having literature in multiple languages and having material in multiple language, videos in multiple languages. What it means is engaging the khalto or the amto down the street to be a part of the campaign, to host coffees, to host subhiyas for you, to invite her friends, to do things in a totally different way than what we're accustomed to seeing. The way that those systems were set up in place weren't to engage us. They were actually designed to leave us out. So what you want to do is completely redefine that. We've seen that happen in some of our local races where you've seen some new blood and new energy and new fires, and it's really exciting to see. We've also seen it around the country. You know, some people have said to me that, you know, new Americans are having a moment, or Arab Americans are having a moment. It's not a moment, respectfully, it's a movement. And we have a lot of great things that are happening. Yeah. You know, we have people winning in unexpected places where there aren't concentrations like us here in Dearborn, places like Colorado, places like California, places like New York City, where there isn't maybe as defined, you know, or places like just all over the country that we're seeing Arab Americans are running or winning. And sometimes if they don't win the first time, that's okay. There's also no shame in losing. I think that's another thing that we have to talk about. Like, you gotta turn your L's into W's. And often if you're not learning from your loss, then you're not learning anything. You're not winning whatsoever, so you have to learn from them. I wanna give a couple of examples, actually, that I think are important highlights. We had one of our alum that we trained for candidate in city council in New York City, and I want to do examples outside of Dearborn to just demonstrate the power of this. Shahana Hanif, who is a city council member in New York City. Shahana is Bengali. Her area is not majority from Bangladesh. It's a very diverse community, but she knew that if she was going to win, she had to engage her community, even though they're not frequent voters, they're not considered a voting bloc. And well, actually, she had a campaign manager, and then that was running an English campaign, and then she had a campaign that was going simultaneously also in her ethnic language, in her family's language, which I think is really important. And that's what helped her win. And so we have had multiple candidates throughout the country do similar things. You know, it's really important that you're redefining what campaigns look like, how you create a space for people to come to. You want them to feel comfortable. You know, ultimately, people show up with the biggest motivator to come to the ballot is when there's a name that looks like theirs on the ballot. That's why we've had historic turnouts recently. It's because you go on a ballot and you see a name and you're like, that name? That's my people. That motivates you, that makes you want to come out. That's not to say you should only vote for people or come out when there's people, but it should be a motivator. It expands the new American voting bloc. It's really critical that we're thinking about ourselves as a full bloc and not as just pockets. The more we include people, the more that there is a collective power in our votes. So That's what I would say. I would say if you are interested in some of that, we're happy to teach the campaign nuts and bolts, to talk about how you talk about yourself, whether you're a candidate, whether you're someone who's interested in managing campaigns or being in the leadership of campaigns. All of this sort of spirals, it leads into one another. And the other piece is really important, that we have campaigns that also, even if the candidate isn't one of our community, but the campaign staff should look like members of our community as well. We have alum in the group here who have done our training, and it's really wonderful to see them, but they're now the leaders of campaign movements in our region. So it's really, really wonderful to see that fire still going and going stronger than ever.
Iman, do you have anything to add before?
Just to add, I think meeting the people where they're at and simplifying the process and not, and removing any kind of roadblocks from any community or community member that wants to vote or has a desire to vote, meeting people or placing precincts in not only churches and schools, but also mosques. And so wherever the people are, and also letting them know, like I recently voted absentee, and when I was in California, making sure that I voted. And letting people know there's a process that simplifies it. You can vote from the comfort of your own home. You don't even have to leave your home to vote. And going back to just explaining the why. And one thing that I do take advantage as an administrator in Dearborn is to talk to my parents and reminding them the power of their vote. Reminding them that they are surrounded by pollution, but what are you going to do about it? If you don't vote, nothing happens. Nothing will change. You want better policies in education, vote. You want better infrastructure. Some of the parents complain about getting, nails in their tires, and frequently having to go to the body shop to fix their cars. What are you going to do about it? Vote. So, yeah.
Amen. Don't clap, vote. No,
You're going to start a chant.
Another slogan
to
right
to the young folks in the room, do not waste your time at political events. The same 12 people show up to those things every single time. I'm telling you this as a candidate, I never show up to events, and people get mad. I say, I don't care, you're 12 votes. The reality is, if you're trying to get people to vote, you're trying to reach people who are not engaged in politics. This is what it means to engage a new electorate. By definition, they're not engaged in politics, right? So, to Iman's point, you got to meet people where they're at. You also can't make any assumptions. The level of no understanding at all of how the process works may baffle you, what, dude, you don't know how to register to vote? Or you don't know how to get an absentee ballot? Or you don't know that you can just go to City Hall? People don't know. And I promise you, forwarding a WhatsApp message is not going to teach them, right? You have a responsibility to talk to individuals. When I ran in 2020, and again this year, I knew that I had to go to weddings. I said, where do people get together? Everywhere will make time for any wedding, right? 15 minutes to vote, something pops up, right? But if there's a wedding, they're there. So I go to weddings, and the groom and bride in our community are always late. So I show up before the groom and bride come, and then I leave before they get there. So what do? I swear, you guys are laughing. I swear to God, this is what I did. I would go table by table, and I had 2 phones and a tablet.
This is real advice, by the way, so take notes.
So I'd say, hey, are you registered to vote? Yeah. I says, good, let's check it. So I take out my phone, and I say, give me your ID. I didn't even tell them, because I had that trust. I just, give me your ID. So I took their ID, I put their license number, ID number in, I put their name, and I saw if they're registered to vote. And if they were registered to vote, I says, hey, I'm requesting your ballot for you. This is what do you mean? I says, you're going to get a ballot in the mail, fill it out, put it back in your mailbox. The postmaster or post carrier is going to take it back. That's all you got to do. I was like, okay. So I used to spend hours doing that. And I would just sit there, because I don't have to convince these people to vote for me. I just got to convince them to vote. And then I know that they're going to vote for me. So I would go table to table, and I say, give me your phone, give me your ID. So what do you need? I say, give me your ID. I just take it over and over and over and over again. And we got over, I think in 2020, we got over 2,700 people registered on the permanent AV list. The problem was, this is where we made a mistake. The problem was, this is in Hamtramck, so it's a big number. A lot of them had no idea what happened when they got their little card in the mail that says request your ballot. So they all just threw it away, right? Or a lot of them just said, oh, I voted. I'm like, no, you're on the permanent AV list. You're not going to get your ballot automatically sent to you every single election cycle. So part of the mistake we learned from this year is the 2,700 new voters that we registered on the permanent absentee list didn't know that they had to return that sheet of paper to get their ballot back, right? So recognize that sometimes, I mean, that was a huge mistake, and I'm mad about it, but we understand that factor. So now we know the 2,700 people in the next election, we just got to send them a letter or a video to explain to them this is what you do when you get it. We just didn't have capacity or time to do it this time around, but we know that that's a strategy heading into 2024. So meet people where they're at to get them where you want them to go, to wrap up Eman's point.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that's, again, why we focus heavily on low propensity voters, is because you can get folks registered, but what happens after registration? And those are the conversations that we're trying to have. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes that 2 5-minute conversation that you're having at the door may not be there. So it's going back, phone banking, talking to voters. And there has to be a lot more education. And I think that's where organizations like ours comes into play, or folks who are already doing the work. I know Eman does a fantastic job. When I first met Eman, she invited me over to her house, and it was like a room filled with Middle Eastern women, MENA women, who were talking about politics and talking about Arab American representation. And I remember being like, wow, I'm empowered. Like, these are the women, I mean, some are here today, but these women are doing the work in the community. And it was one of those, I think you said, like invite people over, have those conversations, because then everyone's going out into their own communities and having these conversations with people within their communities. And we definitely need more of that. And I know, for instance, like with my mom, she wasn't going to go vote unless we took her to vote. And I remember her first election, this is totally off topic, but I think it's hilarious till this day, is it was Hillary and Trump were running. And my mom, you know, she doesn't speak English, so we told her what she's looking for, so we told her how to spell it, and she thought she accidentally voted for the wrong person, and that's why they won office. And we're like, no, your vote is not millions of votes, but that's okay, you know? But then that, you know, it's having those conversations of, sometimes when we vote, we don't win, but we don't rage quit. It's not Call of Duty. We continue, and we keep going. And our communities need representation. So that being said, I have a question from the audience. Can you please explain what a precinct delegate is?
Okay, so a precinct delegate is an elected individual for a precinct. Because, first of all, who knows what a precinct is? Now you could, if you don't know, raise your hand. How about that? Enough people. Okay, so in a community in which you're voting, whether it's a district, a city, school district, there are, all right, Siri, calm down.
Siri wants to be part of the conversation now.
There is something called a precinct. A precinct is how they break down a specific geographic zone to figure out how and who gets what ballot and where they actually get to vote, okay? So it's like, think about it as a map. It's like you have zip codes. Well, this is like a zip code for where you vote. Precinct delegate is an elected person for that area. And there's a Democrat and there's a Republican. So in a two-party system, you get one of each, and you have a right to run for either one. In that situation, a precinct delegate can do two things. One, they get to vote at party conventions for the nominees for some of these positions, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Supreme Court. The second thing that the precinct delegate is supposed to do is talk to the people within their precinct, which is, again, usually a manageable community, where you just go let people know, hey, this is what's on the ballot this year, this is what you're supposed to do, right? So it's the very basic level of democracy, is like, this is the elected official that is kind of like Siri, and is supposed to answer the questions for people in terms of what's on the ballot. So I hope I did a good job explaining. I don't know. If not, just look it up on Google.
I think you did a fantastic job. That being said, I mean, just a plug, if you want to be a poll worker on election day, oh my gosh, that was National Arab American Voter Registration Day was October 8th. Voting Day is November 8th this year. I don't know why I'm tripping up. That's literally, I'm just waiting until November 8th. But that being said, I know the city of Dearborn is recruiting poll workers. You just have to be 16 and older. And they will train you and they will pay you, and it's so much fun. So from 8, well, I actually refer to them for their hours. But again, if you're interested, let us know. We can send you more information. Sorry, shameless plug for the city clerk's office. But that being said, I have another question from the audience. What did representation look like when you ran for office?
I guess,
It's a pointed question, sorry. A.
what's the quote? What did what look like?
What did representation, Arab American representation look like when you ran for office?
So I'm currently the only Arab serving in the Michigan House. I'm currently the only Arab elected in Lansing. I am only the second person to represent Detroit, so the first person was Rashida. And Yusuf Rabi he's half Algerian, half white. So according to the census, he's 100% white. But he is half, so I'm technically the fourth and a half Arab to ever serve in the Michigan legislature. No, wait a minute. No, I'm the third and a half, rather.
Was Yusuf the one that won by one vote?
Huh? Yeah, Yusuf won by a single
one
vote.
vote.
Yeah. He literally won his first election by one. So he'll tell you the story all the time. So Yusuf ran for county commission in 2014, maybe? This is a great story. 2010. So Yusuf ran for county commission in 2010, okay? He saw a woman who was smoking a joint. She was high, okay? And he told her, did you vote? This is a true story. Did you vote? She goes, no, I don't know where to vote. He's like, actually, it's over there. She's like, well, I don't have a ride. So Yusuf's like, okay, I'm going to borrow my friend's moped. So he borrows his friend's moped, gives this woman a ride. They get in a moped accident, okay? They're fine. He has scabs, they're fine. She goes and votes, okay? Because he took her to the polling location to vote. He ended up winning by a single vote that election cycle, okay? So because he took this stoner woman to the polling location on a moped that he crashed, that wasn't his, he was able to win his very first election. So because the election was so tight, they actually did a recount. And he ended up winning by 2 votes. So they doubled his vote count, his win number. So true story, not an exaggeration. U of M, so the stoner thing is real. You guys know I'm not making this up. And that's how they got the vote. They go green more at Michigan than they do at Michigan State. Catching my drift. Oh, representation, yeah. So
It was a great story, though. I'm over here, everyone's like having side conversations about how awesome it was.
I'm like Arab 3.5 in the legislature. So Rashida, Yusuf Abdullah came at the same time, and then myself right now.
That's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Ghida, do you have anything you want to add?
No.
Oh. Don't give your story. It's okay. Okay. We'll respect your privacy. But that being said, I know, for instance, in Dearborn, one of our charter commission members won by 5 votes, literally 5 votes. And the charter commission, which a lot of people don't, when you were talking about elections and we're talking about representation, I think folks don't think about all those commissions, all the like city council, whatever it may be, but the charter commission kind of just decides who's going to represent you on city council. And especially when we're talking about inequities in communities, those are folks that make decisions, right? So again, representation, right? So having those conversations with folks. That being said, we're narrowing down to our final 2 questions. So one of our questions is how has your culture guided you in who you are today?
So I mentioned I'm Lebanese American, but I also grew up in Sierra Leone. So I am a person that is very much shaped by multiple cultures. And also just being Lebanese, the Lebanese community is very diverse. There's 18 different sects officially in Lebanon. So I grew up in a very multicultural environment. And for me, that's always been a really big part of who I am. And so everything that I do is not just empowerment of Arab American communities, it's underrepresented communities overall. Because I truly believe that we're not going to succeed ever alone, that we're much stronger together, and that also we're all human and we all deserve to feel that sense of belonging in any system that's determining our fate. So for me, that's been a really big piece of it in terms of culture overall. In terms of being Arab American and how that's sort of guided me, I have always felt a very strong sense of community. You guys know this, but there's not such thing as just like your nuclear family. It's extended family. It's your aunts and uncles and your great aunts and uncles and your first and second cousins and your third cousins and the neighbors. And when you talk about a gathering or having some sort of life moment, there's usually more than just your siblings and your parents there. So by nature, we're very communal people. And so I've always been a big organizer, even within my family, for things that have happened. So for me, it felt very natural to do that. So for me, my own individual also experience as an immigrant has been really big for me. I think that the values that are most important to me are community, access, and opportunity. Those are really critical in anything that I do. Those have been my guiding values for the work that I do. And so I would say definitely my culture has been, and everybody's a little bit different. Some people it's religion, right? For me, it's culture. Culture has been the biggest driver more than anything.
So I am also, in addition to being an administrator, school administrator, I'm also the executive director of the United Humanitarian Foundation, or UHF. And we do a lot of work wherever there's a need, but mainly we're focusing in on the worst and largest humanitarian crisis in Yemen. For those of you who don't know, if you just Google worst or largest humanitarian crisis, Yemen will be one of the countries that will be on top of the list. And many people do not know that because no one really speaks about it. So that kind of empowers me to do more work abroad and also empower my community locally. So that kind of gives me that drive to just empower the voiceless and to help those. Because and I tell my newcomers, and when they're learning about Constitution and when I do the walkthroughs in history, they're not lucky enough. They can compare and contrast. They can't just go and express how they feel or, have that freedom of free speech. In Yemen or elsewhere, many countries around the world, you can't just go out in protests, whatever it comes to mind. So really taking advantage of the freedoms that we do have here in the United States, and taking advantage of that, and not letting that go to waste. So that's my drive. That's my drive to empower my community.
Can I ask a question of the audience? How many of you are proud of your cultural heritage? Okay. Some hands are not up. I grew up sort of in an era where I tried to hide from mine, right? And I think that very much colored my experience in politics and also in my own upbringing. But I tried for many years to shy away from my parents' native land and sort of the culture associated with it for a long time, right? And I think you guys are fortunate enough to grow up in an era where your cultural expression is something that you take as a point of pride and something you share. Sometimes y'all a little bit too obnoxious with how much you share it. But for me, that was a huge chunk of my upbringing. And when I walk and navigate the spaces as an elected official now, I see the value in recognizing the competency of knowing the Arab and Yemeni culture and also understanding just the culture here. We were the first family in my neighborhood, we were the first Arab family to move into a black neighborhood. And, that absolutely made me, and it wasn't until I was I think I was in the 9th grade, where we finally started seeing more diversity in our community, but we were the only Arab house in a neighborhood of 50 to 60 homes that were majority black. So that very much shifted and raised me in terms of how I viewed the world and how I engage with the African American community. But I also know that when I am able to connect with the Arab or Yemeni culture, that it inspires a lot of people in our own community to say, wow, like you can get up and give a flame speech against the Republicans, but also you are very much connected to some of the Yemeni talk or things of that nature. And for a lot of folks, that was a hugely inspiring thing. And I know that power that I bring in terms of being able to navigate and understand both of those things. So it's very helpful. And I think it also allows me to better connect with different subsets and different groups of people in politics and in my campaigning, because I know what it's like to sort of be the odd man out, but I also know that how to blend in when you have to. So this idea of code switching, sometimes you get mocked for code switching, but I think it's a skill set that some folks just might not be able to have because they couldn't and did not grow up with it. So it's a very important skill set, and I think it very much rooted in how I was brought up with my culture.
Yeah, and for me personally, like I was one of those obnoxious people that, back then, Yahoo, AOL, but everything said Iraqi in it. Mind you, again, lived a few days in Iraq, but most people say it doesn't count. But that being said, like my culture has always driven me to do the work that I do, and I think sometimes it's why are you doing politics? Why are you doing civic engagement? And one of our panelists has already shared is, our families come from, Iraq was a dictatorship. And for me to be here and be able to advocate for my community and advocate for folks and uplift voices, I think that's something that's impactful and something that we can do. And one day, inshallah, in Iraq they can do that, right? And we're working towards democracy, which maybe I shouldn't say democracy because that's a whole different conversation. Democracy is flawed sometimes, and we can have that conversation. But that being said, I think it definitely drives the work that I do, and remembering my roots and where my family came from, and using that to guide my future and guide the work that I do in my career or even at home or within the community. And remembering that, I know for me, my parents sacrificed everything to come to the United States for us to have a better life. I came here as a refugee at the age of 2. But my goal has always been to give back to the community that gave to me and give back to the community that my family comes from. So that's something that I think a lot of us, I would say, have ties to our communities in one way or another. So that's been something that's been very impactful. Okay, I know we're coming off, we're almost at 8 o'clock, and I want to make sure that I leave you all with some closing remarks. So we're going to leave this open to closing remarks, and then also, what advice would you give folks in this room who want to get involved, whether it's running for office or it's doing advocacy work or talking to their neighbors about the elections or anything along representation?
I would start off by saying, find out what your passion is. Is your passion education policy? Is it being an advocate to ensure that we have better roads and ensure that our homes won't get flooded again? Is it environmental injustice? Will you stand up for those who are suffering with some of the worst air pollution in the country? So find out what your passion is. Find out what your passion is and find a group. Maybe if you can lead a group. If there's not a group that's already formed, so why reinvent the wheel? Find someone that's already doing the work and send an email or connect with them on Instagram or Facebook and say, hey, how can I help? How can I be part of this? So yeah, just work smarter, not harder, and just be involved.
If you are going to or have aspirations to run for office, my piece of advice is run for office because you want to do something, not because you want to be someone. I think that's really important. A title is never going to make who you are. It's never going to solve a problem. It's how you show up, why you show up, and who you bring along with you that's going to solve a problem. So if that's your aspirations to actually run, do it because you want to do something, not because you want to be someone. That's the big one. If you want to be involved in campaigns or you want to change something in your community, just find something that you care about in that moment. It can change. That's the other thing. It's like none of this has to be permanent. I think the fact that you got engaged speaks for itself more than the fact that you've committed to, one thing. And then one thing that people always were shocked by me is that I did multiple things at once. So I had a job and I did a campaign at the same time and I led an organization that I cared about. And people said, why are you doing all of these things? Don't let anyone box you into one thing. Don't let anybody box you into one thing. You could do a lot of different things and be badass at all of them. So do that. That's my advice.
I'm going to sort of leaning into what Ghida said, and it's going to answer your question, I think. When you recognize why you want to do something, when you have clarity on that, as Eman mentioned Simon Sinek's book. Well, first of all, I have two pieces of advice. Make sure you floss your teeth every night. I'm not joking. And commit to reading 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. First of all, and I know you guys are like, oh, such a stupid advice. I promise you, the level of readers of books in this country continues to drop every single day, and it's actually destructive for civil society. So I'm asking you to take 30 minutes out of 24 hours a day to read, 15 when you wake up and 15 at night. So to answer your question about how do you deal with the negativity around your culture, I think when you have clarity on why you're doing something, you have skin in the game. And the thing about having skin in the game is when, as Akon would say, when the going gets rough, the tough stay tough. And he's a great philosopher if you don't know who he is. Akon, look it up. But that is important because when you know why you're doing something, people are going to tell you you can't do it. You're going to have monetary forces in politics against the work you're doing, and it's going to suck. It's like, why do I want to keep doing this? But when you recognize what's driving you, and oftentimes it's sort of peeling the onion and trying to figure out what causes me to be so interested in this particular issue. When you take a step back and look at your life and you look at your lived experience, there usually is a moment for you that sort of tells you why you want to get into this fight. And I'll give you an example. For me, and I didn't know this at the time, but my dad works for Chrysler or Stellantis. They changed their name so many times. 2007, 2008, my dad got a pink slip. We are not a family that bought a small business or have investments. My dad's job was what provided us our ability to live a dignified life. When he got the slip that he was told he was losing that, first time in my life that I saw him powerless. Like I felt the powerlessness my father had in that moment because there's nothing that he could do in that moment. And in hindsight, I think about the anger that I had and the shame, quite frankly, of like, dang, we were not going to be able to provide, he's not going to be able to provide for us. I'm not going to be able to get my new Vans, sneakers every single school year. Like there was a lot of things going in my head as an 8th and 9th grader. And that moment for me was like the moment where I said, it sucked that some company was able to strip my father of his dignity, the snap of a finger. And I don't want to see that happen to anyone ever again. So when I think about all the frustration I have, I remember that particular story, right? And I think as you look back into your life, you're going to find some of those moments where like, yeah, this really did make me angry. This really did make me sad or happy or excited. And that's going to be the factor. So having said that, there are two things you have to remember. One, you need to find a circle of support, and it's usually a political home. So I say find a political home, and if it's NAC, if it's New American Leaders, if it's a local organization, you need to find a organizing base for yourself to be able to go and share your frustrations and share how to figure out how to build power. Because when you do it alone, it sucks. Second piece of advice is what my father told me when I got into politics. You got to be a football. Now, he was talking about soccer. I don't like soccer, so I took American football. He said, you're going to get kicked in the mud. You're going to get penalties, or in his mind, red cards. You know, people are going to boo. People are going to cheer. It's going to get cold and rainy sometimes, but you got to have skin as tough as leather, and you got to focus on the goal, or in this case, the touchdown. I think that's what you got to focus when you think about this work. Be a football. You choose which football you want to be, but that is, I think, an important aspect of this. Is sometimes it's going to suck, particularly when you're a community that's marginalized. I'm not saying you tolerate disrespect, but when you recognize your goal, when you recognize that touchdown, it's going to be really hard to take you off the field.
I'll just add a couple of words to that. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, there's no denying that there is a xenophobic, Islamophobic nature to politics right now. It's very real, and especially the last 8 years, there's been a rise of white nationalism in our politics, and I think it's important to call it out. But I also think that if you let that occupy the entire conversation, that's the conversation. It's no longer, there's no room for something else. So if you're not stepping up and creating your own narrative in the process, then you're letting that be the narrative for you and your people. So you have to step up, you have to reframe, you have to own it, you have to do something positive out of whatever you care about.
I think Michelle Obama said it best. When they go low, you go high. Be the light, and as Abe mentioned, find a support group if you're in the political arena. I mean, the question was kind of broad, but if you're in politics and you hear the negativity, find a support system. But be that light, be that positive change, be that better person. Let them learn from you. I mean, you'd be surprised of how many people you can change by your behavior, by your actions, and by what you say. So always think, I'm going to be the better person. Of course, we want you to be safe and respected, but at the end of the day, be that shining light where you change ideas and change perception and make this world a better place.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for that. Honestly, these are some of the busiest people out there, and they made the time to be here today to talk about representation. I just want to take a quick second to show them our appreciation for them to be here and share their wisdom with everyone. And just thank you. I don't have any other words other than thank you. I wish I had this when I was younger. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a voice for many in our community, uplifting the voices of many in our community. So can we take a quick round of applause? Of course, thank you all for being here. So I do have 2 announcements before we end here. I promise we're all gonna leave, well, it's already 8 o'clock, so by 8:02. Okay, so there is a songwriting workshop with the museum with our artist in residence, Amanda Ikri, next Thursday, and her concert on Saturday. So if you're interested in that, check out ArabAmericanMuseum.org. And then another announcement is there is an event panel happening with Hayyan Sharara, a live reading and book signing on, today at 7:30, which has already started, sorry. Sorry, Fatma, I just saw this. But yes, so again, if we could thank our panelists and also continue to do the work in our communities, I promise you it will, like sometimes having a conversation with someone, it could be very daunting, sometimes especially with what's happening right now, but we have to continue, we have to move forward, and we have to bring our community along with us. Thank you all for being here.